The world outside the gates of Yuma Territorial Prison was too bright, too loud, too open. For 10 years, Jedediah Stone's world had been a 6 by 9 foot box of blistering stone, the sky a tauntingly small sliver of blue. The only sounds the rhythmic clang of hammers on rock and the groans of damned men. Now, the vast and forgiving expanse of the Arizona desert stretched before him, and its silence was more deafening than any prison roar. He stood there for a long, still moment, a scarecrow of a man in cheap, ill-fitting release clothes. The 10 years had stripped the life from him, leaving behind a creature of sinew and bone and burning, quiet rage. The sun-crinkled eyes that had once held the warmth of a summer sky were now chips of flint, narrowed against the glare and the memory of what had been stolen. The man who had entered Yuma as Jedediah Stone, an honest rancher with a heart full of love for a woman named Sarah, was dead. The one who walked out was a ghost, and he was heading home to haunt the living. The warden's final words echoed in his ears. "You've paid your debt to the territory, Stone. Stay out of trouble, trouble." The word was a bitter joke. Trouble hadn't found him. It had been born in his own house, worn his own family name. As he began the long walk toward the dusty collection of shacks that constituted the town of Yuma, the memories came, unbidden and sharp as broken glass. Not the memories of the prison, those were dull, monotonous, but the memories of before. He and Marcus, brothers, partners. They had inherited a fine spread of land, the Stone Creek Ranch, a place their father had carved out of the wilderness. Jedediah was the steady one, the one with a feel for the land and the stock. Marcus was the charming one, with a quick smile and a mind for numbers, always dreaming of more. The jealousy was always there, a low simmer beneath the surface. Marcus had wanted the ranch to be a cattle empire. Jed had been content with a good life. Marcus had courted Sarah. Sarah had fallen in love with Jed. The breaking point had been the gold. A flash flood had exposed a new seam in the creek bed on their property. It wasn't a motherlode, but it was rich. Enough to expand, to build the empire Marcus craved. Or enough to build a new house for a new bride, as Jed had planned. They had agreed to keep it a secret, to work it themselves. Then an old, grizzled prospector named Silas Blackwood had stumbled upon them. He'd seen the color in their pan. The flashback was as vivid as if it were happening now. The argument in the barn. "He'll tell everyone," Marcus had hissed, his face pale with a feverish greed. "The whole territory will descend on us. We'll offer him a share," Jed had argued, his voice calm. "A small one. Enough to keep him quiet. He's an old man, Marcus. We don't have to be greedy." "You're weak, Jedediah," Marcus had sneered, his eyes holding a look Jed had never seen before, a look of pure, venomous contempt. "You've always been weak, content with dirt and cattle when you could have the world." The next morning, Jed had found Silas Blackwood dead by the creek, bullet from Jed's own cold peacemaker in his back. Before he could even process the horror, the sheriff and his posse had ridden up. And there, riding with them, was Marcus, his face a mask of practiced grief. He told them how he'd seen Jed arguing with the old man, how Jed had a temper, how he must have been drunk. They had found the prospector's small pouch of gold nuggets in Jed's saddlebag. The trial was a farce. It was Jedediah Stone's word against his brothers. The respected, ambitious Marcus Stone against the hot-headed Jedediah. Sarah had wept on the stand, her confusion and heartbreak a weapon Marcus wielded with surgical precision. The jury had convicted him in under an hour. His last memory of the free world was the sight of his brother putting a comforting arm around Sarah as Jed was led away in chains, a triumphant, proprietary glint in his eyes. Now, 10 years later, that memory was the fuel that burned in his soul. In the town, he did not go to the saloon. He went to the livery. He needed a horse, a gun, and a knife. He had no money. The $10 in release pay was an insult. But Yuma had taught him that there were other currencies. He found the stable master, a bloated, sweaty man, cheating at a game of mumbly pig with a young stable hand. Jed watched for a minute, his flinty eyes missing nothing. "I'll play you for that roan in the corner stall," Jed said, his voice a dry rasp, and used to conversation. The stable master looked him up and down, taking in the cheap clothes and the gaunt frame. He saw an easy mark. "And what are you waggerin', friend?" "Your good looks," he laughed. "I'm wagering my skill," Jed said. He pulled a small, wicked-looking chip from his boot, a parting gift from his cellmate, and slammed it into the dirt. One game. My knife against your horse. The game was short. Jed's throws were not the clumsy tosses of a drunkard. They were the precise, deadly, and unnerving motions of a man who had spent 10 years perfecting the art of turning any object into a weapon. His final throw, a complex maneuver that required the knife to flip twice in the air, landed with its point quivering perfectly in the center of the peg. The stable master's face went pale. He had seen a parlor trick. Jed knew he had seen a threat. He handed over the reins to the roan without another word. Next, the gun. He knew he couldn't buy one, but he knew men like the ones in the Yuma saloon. Men who won their guns in poker games and were too drunk to keep them. He walked into the loudest, grimmiest saloon in town. He didn't order a drink. He stood by the poker table, watching, his presence a cold, silent void that slowly leached the warmth from the room. He waited for the high-stakes game to end, for the winner, a big, loud-mouthed buffalo hunter, to rake in his pot, which included a holstered Colt revolver. Jed followed him out into the alley. "I'll give you a choice," Jed said, stepping from the shadows. The hunter, drunk and belligerent, turned, his hand going for his new prize. "I don't make deals with bums." Jed didn't move, didn't flinch. "You can give me the gun and walk away, or I can take it from your corpse." It was not the words, but the way he said them. The absolute lack of emotion, the dead certainty in his eyes. The hunter was a man used to casual violence, but this was something else. This was not a threat. It was a statement of fact from a man who had nothing left to lose. He saw the ghost of Yuma in Jed's eyes. Cursing, he unbuckled the gun belt and threw it on the ground, then stumbled away into the night. Jed strapped on the gun belt. The weight of it was familiar, a missing part of him now restored. He checked the action. It was a good weapon, well-oiled. It would serve its purpose. He rode out of Yuma that night, a solitary figure heading north. He was no longer a rancher. He was not even a man. He was an instrument of pure, cold-forged vengeance. The 10 years in prison had been a crucible. The soft heart of Jedediah Stone had been burned away, leaving only the hard, sharp steel of his purpose. His brother had cost him everything. His land, his name, his love, his life. Now, he was coming back to collect the debt. The ghost was riding home, and the price of his return would be paid in blood. A ghost cannot simply ride up to the front door of the life that was stolen from him. Marcus was no longer just a rancher, he was a king on a stolen throne. In the 10 years Jed had been gone, the Stone Creek Ranch had become the MS. Cattle Company, a sprawling empire that choked the valley. Marcus was a respected man, a pillar of the community in the nearby town of Blackstone, which had grown fat and prosperous on his influence. To ride in and call him a murderer would be suicide. Jed would be shot or hanged as a madman and an escaped convict before he got within a mile of his brother. Vengeance required patience, a lesson Yuma had taught in excruciating detail. First, Jed needed information. He needed to know the lay of the land, the scope of his brother's power, the names of the men who enforced his will. He needed a map of his brother's life so he could find the perfect place to burn it to the ground. His first destination was not Blackstone, but a small, dusty trading post 50 miles to the south, a place called Cutter's Crossing. It was here, according to a rumor he'd overheard in Yuma, that a man named Eli Vance had settled. Eli had been the head ranch hand at Stone Creek, a man loyal to their father, and a friend to Jed. He had been a witness at the trial, his testimony hesitant and confused, his eyes never quite meeting Jed's. He was a man who knew more than he had said. Jed rode with the relentless, ground-covering pace of a man who no longer needed sleep. He was fueled by a black, burning energy. He found Eli Vance running the trading post, his back now bent with age and a weight that was more than just years. When Eli saw him walk through the door, he dropped a sack of flour, his face turning the color of ash. He looked at Jed as if he had seen a specter. "Jedediah," he whispered, his voice trembling. "By God, I heard you were released. I never thought you'd come back." "I'm not back, Eli," Jed said, his voice a low rasp. "I'm just passing through. I need you to tell me about my brother." Eli's fear was palpable. He looked around the empty store, as if Marcus's spies might be hiding among the barrels of nails and bolts of cloth. He led Jed into a back room, his hands shaking as he poured two glasses of whiskey. "He's a big man now, Jed," Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The biggest. He owns the whole valley. The water rights, the bank in Blackstone, the sheriff, he owns it all. He brought in money from somewhere, right after you were sent away. Said it was an inheritance from our mother's side. Used it to buy out all the small ranchers. Those who didn't sell found their wells poisoned or their barns burned in the night." "And Sarah?" Jed asked, the name feeling like a shard of glass in his throat. Eli couldn't meet his eyes. He stared into his whiskey. "She married him. A year after the trial. She was lost, Jed. Alone. Marcus was there. He's good at being whatever people need him to be. She lives in the big house he built, the one up on the hill overlooking the old ranch. She never comes into town much. People say she's not well. Sadness, they say. Like a flower that's been kept in a dark room." The words were like a knife twisting in Jed's gut. The image of Sarah, his Sarah, a prisoner in a gilded cage built by his brother, solidified his resolve into something as hard and cold as diamond. "Who are his men?" Jed asked, changing the subject, his voice devoid of the emotion he felt. "A nasty crew," Eli said, relieved to be on safer ground. "His foreman is a man named Cutter. A brutal piece of work who enjoys his job too much. And he's got a half-dozen hired guns on the payroll. But the real danger is a man he brought in a few years back. A bounty hunter, they say. Calls himself Cord. He's Marcus's shadow, his enforcer. He's the one who handles the wet work." Jed listened, absorbing every detail, filing it away in the cold, methodical library of his mind. He had the names. He had the structure of his brother's empire. "Why didn't you speak up at the trial, Eli?" Jed asked, his voice quiet but heavy with the weight of the 10 years between them. "You knew I didn't kill that prospector." Eli finally looked up, his eyes filled with a deep, soul-weary shame. "Marcus came to me the night before. He showed me the deed to this trading post. Said it was mine. Said my wife and daughter would be taken care of for the rest of their lives. All I had to do was be confused, not remember things so clearly." He let out a long, shuddering breath. "He also said that if I remembered things too well, my family might meet with an accident, a fire, a stray bullet. He didn't have to draw a picture for me, Jed. I was a coward. I chose my family's safety over my friend's freedom. I've lived with that every day for 10 years. Jed stood up. He felt no anger towards the old man, only a cold, bitter understanding of how his brother operated, using fear and greed as his tools. "He'll know I came here," Jed said. "He'll have eyes everywhere. You need to be ready." "What are you going to do?" Eli whispered, his face pale. "My brother built an empire on a grave and a lie," Jed said, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. "I'm going to tear it down, stone by stone." He walked out of the trading post, leaving Eli Vance to tremble with the consequences of a ghost's visit. Jed now had a trail to follow, a trail that would lead him from the outer edges of his brother's web right to its black-hearted center. The first stone he intended to pull loose had a name: Cutter. Jedediah knew that a direct assault on the MS Cattle Company would be a fool's errand. Marcus was a fortress, surrounded by the walls of his wealth, his influence, and his hired guns. To bring the fortress down, Jed had to crumble the foundations first. And the primary foundation stone was the foreman, Cutter. From what Eli had told him, Cutter was more than just a foreman. He was the instrument of Marcus's tyranny. He was the one who led the night raids on homesteads, the one who delivered the threats, the one whose fists and boots enforced his boss's will. He was a man who thrived on fear. Jed decided he would teach him a new lesson in that very subject. Jed didn't ride towards Blackstone. He circled wide, into the badlands that bordered the Stone Creek Marcus territory. He needed to find Cutter on his own terms, away from the ranch and its men. He spent 2 days watching, a ghost in the rocks, observing the patterns of their mess. Riders. He learned that Cutter, a man of routine and arrogance, made a weekly trip to a line shack at the far western edge of the property, a place where he would pick up a bottle of whiskey stashed for him by a contact from a neighboring town and tally the week's cattle counts. He always made the trip alone. On the day of the ride, Jed was waiting. He didn't plan an ambush with a gun. That was too quick, too impersonal. This needed to be a lesson. He chose his ground in a narrow, rocky arroyo through which the trail passed. He didn't hide. He stood in the middle of the trail, a solitary and moving figure, his duster stirred by the wind. Cutter rode into the arroyo and reined in his horse, his hand immediately dropping to his pistol. He saw a gaunt, hard-faced stranger blocking his path. He didn't see a ghost. He saw a problem to be removed. "You're on private property, friend," Cutter snarled, his voice a low growl. "Turn around and ride out, before you get hurt." "I'm looking for a man named Marcus Stone," Jed said, his voice calm and even. "You ain't half the territory," Cutter sneered. "He ain't seen visitors." "Now, I won't tell you again. I'm not here to see him," Jed said. "I'm here to see you. You were there, weren't you? 10 years ago. At the trial. You were one of the concerned citizens who testified you saw me threatening Old Man Blackwood." Cutter's sneer faltered. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition dawning. He had seen this man before, but a younger, softer version, standing in a prisoner's box. The blood drained from his face. "Stone," he breathed. "That's right," Jed said. He took a slow step forward. "You lied. You helped my brother send me to hell. Now, hell has come back for a visit." Cutter was a brute, but he was not a fool. He knew he was facing more than just an ex-convict. He was facing a legend's wrath. He drew his gun, but Jed had been expecting it. He had spent 10 years in a cage with men like Cutter. He knew how their minds worked. As Cutter's gun cleared his holster, Jed dove to the side, not away from the horse, but towards it. The shot went wide. Jed grabbed the stirrup leather, using the horse's own panicked movement to swing himself up behind Cutter. The foreman roared in surprise and fury, trying to bring his gun around. The fight on the back of the terrified, bucking horse was a brutal, primal thing. It was not a gunfight. It was a brawl. Jed was not the same man Cutter remembered. Yuma had stripped him of his fat and his mercy, leaving behind a creature of wire-thin muscle and pure, focused violence. He slammed his elbow into Cutter's jaw, then wrapped an arm around his throat, squeezing. Cutter, gasping for air, tried to throw him off, but Jed's grip was like iron. They tumbled from the horse, crashing to the hard-packed earth. Jed was on him in an instant, the shiv from Yuma appearing in his hand. He pressed the point to Cutter's throat. "I could kill you right now," Jed hissed, his face inches from the foreman's terrified, sweat-soaked visage. "And I will. But not before you tell me what I want to know." Broken and terrified, Cutter talked. He confessed everything. He told Jed how Marcus had paid him handsomely for his false testimony. He told him about Marcus's operations, about the secret ledgers he kept, detailing the extortion and blackmail he used to maintain his power. He told him where the ledgers were kept, in a hidden safe in the main house. "Now, please," Cutter whimpered, tears of fear and pain streaming down his face. "Let me go. I'll leave. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." Jed looked down at the pathetic, broken man. He thought of the 10 years he had lost, of the man he had become. He thought of Sarah. A cold, hard voice in his head screamed for him to finish it, to slit the liar's throat. But another, fainter voice, a ghost of the man he used to be, held him back. Killing this worm would be an execution, not a victory. It would make him no better than his brother. He stood up. "Get on your horse," Jed said, his voice cold. "Ride away from here. If I ever see you again, I won't be in a merciful mood." Cutter scrambled to his feet and onto his horse, spurring it into a frantic gallop, not looking back. Jed watched him go. He had not taken the man's life, but he had taken something else, his power, his arrogance, and his nerve. He had sent a message of terror back to the heart of his brother's empire. The first domino had fallen, and the sound of its fall would echo all the way to Blackstone. The news of Cutter's disappearance, and the terrified, incoherent story he told before he vanished for good, hit the MS. Cattle Company like a physical blow. Marcus Stone knew, with a sickening certainty, that his brother was back. The ghost he had tried to bury in Yuma had clawed its way out of the grave, and it was coming for him. His first instinct was a cold, reptilian fear. His second was a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. He had built an empire. He would not let the ghost of his weakling brother tear it down. He immediately tightened his grip on Blackstone, doubling the number of hired guns patrolling the town. He put a bounty on Jedediah's head, a quiet one, circulated among the shadier elements of the territory for an escaped convict and no murderer. He turned his own home, the grand mansion on the hill, into a fortress. and he turned his attention to the one person he knew Jedediah would eventually come for, Sarah. Jed, now armed with the knowledge of the secret ledgers, knew his next move had to be to get a look inside that house. But more than that, Oral, aching need gnawed at him. He had to see Sarah. He had to know if she was a willing queen in his brother's kingdom, or a prisoner. The answer to that question felt more important than the revenge itself. He did not ride into Blackstone. He approached it like a wolf stalking a heavily armed camp. He spent days in the hills overlooking the town, studying the new patrols, the routines of the guards at his brother's mansion. He saw the house, a monument to Marcus's greed, built on the very spot where his and Jed's small, shared cabin used to stand. And he saw her. He saw Sarah walking in the walled garden behind the mansion. She was as beautiful as he remembered, but it was a fragile, haunted beauty. She moved slowly, a book held in red in her hands, her shoulders slumped, a profound sadness clinging to her like a shroud. She was a prisoner. The knowledge settled in his soul not with a crash, but with a deep, quiet ache. He had to speak to her. He found his opportunity in the one place Marcus's control was not absolute, the church. Eli had told him Sarah still attended services every Sunday, a small act of rebellion Marcus allowed, as it maintained the illusion of a pious, normal life. That Sunday, Jed was there. He did not go inside. He waited in the small, overgrown cemetery behind the church, a place of silent, weathered stones. He stood by his own parents' graves. When the service ended, Sarah, as was her habit, came to lay a flower on the graves. She was so lost in her own thoughts that she did not see him at first. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice a low, rough sound he barely recognized. She froze, her hand flying to her mouth, the flower dropping from her fingers. She turned, and her eyes, the same warm, brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for 10 years, widened in a mixture of terror, disbelief, and a flicker of something he dared not name. "Jedediah," she whispered, his name a ghost on her lips. "It can't be." He looked even harder, more dangerous than the boy she had loved. This was a man carved from stone and sorrow. "It's me," he said. The tears came then, silent tracks down her pale cheeks. "He told me you died," she sobbed. "A fever in the prison. He showed me a letter." The depth of his brother's cruelty was a fresh, twisting knife. "He's a liar, Sarah. He's been a liar from the beginning." "I know," she whispered, her voice filled with a decade of self-loathing. "I think I always knew deep down, but I was scared. I was alone. And he was so kind, at first." She looked up at the fortress on the hill. "This isn't a home, Jed. It's a cage. I'm his prize. The last piece of you that he could steal." The shared pain between them was a tangible thing. For a moment, the 10 years, the prison, the betrayal, all of it fell away. And they were just the boy and the girl who had fallen in love by Stone Creek. He took a step towards her, his hand reaching out. She flinched and took a step back, the fear returning to her eyes. "You can't be here," she said, her voice an urgent, panicked whisper. "He'll kill you. He has men everywhere. There's a bounty." "I know," Jed said. "I'm not here to stay. I'm here for the ledgers. Cutter told me about them. The ones in the safe." Her eyes widened. "Yes. In his study, behind a painting of our father." She looked at him, a new, desperate hope in her eyes. "If you could get them, if you could show the world what he really is, we could be free." "I'm going to get them," Jed promised. "But I need your help. I need a way in." Their reunion was cut short by the sound of an approaching rider. One of Marcus's guards. "You have to go," she hissed. "Next Sunday," Jed said, his voice low and firm. "During the service." "I'm coming. Leave a window on the east side of the study unlocked. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes locked on his. "Be careful, Jedediah," she whispered. He melted back into the shadows of the cemetery, his heart a tangled knot of old love and new purpose. The woman he loved was not lost to him. She was a captive. And now, his quest for revenge had a new, more powerful name. It was a rescue mission. Marcus Stone was not a stupid man. When his guard reported that Sarah had seemed flustered, her eyes red from weeping after her visit to the cemetery, his finely honed paranoia went on high alert. He questioned her, his voice a silken, menacing purr. She was a poor liar, and her stammered excuses about being overcome with emotion only confirmed his suspicions. He hadn't seen Jed, but he had felt his presence. He had spoken to Sarah. The ghost had breached his walls. The mansion on the hill ceased to be a home in any sense of the word. It became an armed camp. Marcus hired for new gunslingers, hard, emotionless men with reputations for brutality, and posted them around the house day and night. The town of Blackstone became an occupied territory. His men swaggered through the streets, their presence a constant, suffocating threat. The whispers of war were now an open declaration. Marcus's greatest fear was not a direct assault. It was the ledgers. They were his only vulnerability, the paper and ink record of his entire criminal enterprise. The thought of Jed getting his hands on them was a cold dread that gnawed at his gut. But he also saw an opportunity. The ledgers were the perfect bait. He made a great show of sending for a new, larger safe from a town 50 miles away. He let it be known that he was consolidating his records, that all his important documents would be secured. He knew Jed would hear of it. He wanted him to. He wanted Jed to believe he had a window of opportunity before the new safe arrived. He was setting a trap, using his own secrets as the lure. And to be the teeth of that trap, he sent a telegraph message. It was a message to a man whose name was spoken with even more fear than Jedediah's had been before his fall. A relentless, cold-blooded bounty hunter named Cord Jackman. Jackman was not a man who hunted for poster money. He hunted for sport, and for the exorbitant fees paid by wealthy men who needed problems to disappear permanently. The bounty on Jedediah Stone was now $10,000 a king's ransom. Jed, hiding out in the Badlands, heard the news from Eli Vance's terrified son, who had ridden out to warn him. The new guns, the bounty hunter, the new safe fight was all clear. Marcus was baiting him. He knew Jed was coming for the ledgers, and he was turning the mansion into a fortress, a meat grinder designed to chew him up. The odds were now impossible. To get into that house, he would have to get past a dozen hired guns and a legendary bounty hunter. It was a suicide mission. The cold, calculating part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive in Yuma, told him to run, to take Sarah and disappear. But the other part of him, the part that was still Jedediah Stone, the son of an honest man, refused. To run would be to let Marcus win, to let him keep the land, the name, and the power he had stolen, to leave the town of Blackstone to choke under his brother's boot heel. He was trapped between his desire for revenge and his rekindled love for Sarah. He looked at the map Eli had given him, a detailed layout of the mansion that Sarah had managed to secretly draw and pass on. It showed the guards' patrol routes, the location of the study, the unlocked window. It was a path into the heart of the fortress. It was a path to the ledgers. And it was a path that would almost certainly lead to his death. The whispers of war had reached their crescendo. The battle was coming. Jedediah Stone, a lone ghost against an army, prepared to walk into his brother's carefully laid trap. He was not just fighting for revenge anymore. He was fighting for the truth. And he knew that some truths were worth dying for. The Sunday of the raid arrived with a deceptive calm. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and the air in Blackstone was still, the usual dust settled by a brief morning shower. From his vantage point in the hills, Jedediah watched the townspeople, including his brother and Sarah, file into the small white church. The bell tolled its gentle, rhythmic peal, a surreal counterpoint to the violence he was about to unleash. This was his window. An hour, perhaps 90 minutes, before the service ended and the fortress on the hill would be at its most alert. He did not approach the mansion directly. That was the path of a fool. He used the knowledge gleaned from Sarah's map and his own days of observation. He circled wide, coming in from the north, where a steep, rocky cliff face formed the back wall of the estate. It was a sheer drop of 50 feet, considered impassable by Marcus and his men. But in Yuma, Jed had learned that impassable was a subjective term. He had spent years scaling the smooth, sun-baked walls of the prison quarry, his fingers and toes finding purchase where none seemed to exist. With a length of rope and a small grappling hook he had taken from the trading post, he began the ascent. It was a perilous, muscle-burning climb, the rock scraping his already scarred hands. But he moved with the steady, silent grace of a spider, his focus absolute. He reached the top and pulled himself over the high stone wall of the garden. He was in. The air inside the walls was different, heavy with the scent of roses and an unnerving, manicured quiet. He was in the belly of the beast. He moved through the garden, a ghost in the midday sun, his Colt in his hand. He counted for guards patrolling the grounds, their paths predictable, their attention lazy. They were expecting a threat from the front gate, not from the sky. He bypassed them, sticking to the shadows of the manicured hedges, his movements a fluid, deadly dance. He reached the east side of the house. The study window, just as Sarah had promised, was slightly ajar. He slipped inside, his boots making no sound on the thick, imported rug. The room was a monument to his brother's ego. The walls were lined with leather-bound books Marcus had never read, and a massive oak desk dominated the space. And there, on the far wall, was the painting of their father, his stern, honest face a silent rebuke to the man his son had become. Jed moved the painting. Behind it was the safe. It was an old, iron monster, the one he had been expecting. The new, more formidable one had not yet arrived. This was his chance. He did not have explosives. He had something better, memory. He and Marcus had used this safe as boys to hide their treasures. He remembered the combination, a series of numbers tied to their father's birthday. His fingers flew across the dial, the old sequence as familiar as his own name. Right to 18, left to 71, right to 29. The tumblers clicked, a sound sweeter than any birdsong. The heavy door swung open. Inside, nestled amongst stacks of cash and deeds, were the ledgers. 3 thick, leather-bound books. He pulled them out. He had the proof. He had the weapon that could destroy his brother. He was about to close the safe when a sound from the hallway made him freeze. A floorboard creaked. It was too early. The church service wasn't over. He melted back into the shadows behind a heavy curtain just as the study door opened. It was not a guard. It was Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. "Jed," she whispered. "I felt I had to come back. I told Marcus I was feeling faint." "I have them," he said, holding up the ledgers. "It's over, Sarah. We can." His words were cut short by a cold, new voice from the doorway. "No," the voice said. "It's just beginning." Standing there was a tall, impossibly lean man with a face like a bird of prey and eyes as dead and black as polished stones. In his hands, he held a sawed-off shotgun, its twin barrels pointed directly at them. Jedediah didn't need to be told who it was. This was Cord Jackman, the bounty hunter. The trap had been sprung. Cord Jackman smiled, a thin, bloodless stretching of his lips that held no humor. "The little lady was the key," he said, his voice a dry, reptilian hiss. "Your brother's a smart man. He knew you'd contact her. He's had me watching her, not the house, for a week. I followed her from the church." Behind him, the hallway began to fill with Marcus's hired guns, their faces grim, their pistols drawn. In the distance, the church bell began to ring again, signaling the end of the service. Marcus would be on his way. They were trapped, hopelessly outnumbered in the heart of the Devil's Fortress. Sarah let out a small, terrified gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Jed pushed her behind him, shielding her with his body, his mind racing, calculating the impossible odds. The ledgers were in his left hand, his Colt in his right. "It's over, Stone," Cord said, taking a step into the room. "Give me the books. The boss wants you alive. He wants to have a little chat." But he didn't say anything about her. His dead eyes flicked to Sarah, a look of predatory hunger in them. That was the mistake. The threat to Sarah was a spark on a short fuse. The cold, calculating ghost from Yuma vanished, and the raw, protective fury of Jedediah Stone took over. He was not going to let them touch her. "Now, Sarah," he yelled, and in the same motion, he hurled the heavy ledgers with all his might directly at Cord's face. The bounty hunter, surprised by the sudden, unorthodox attack, instinctively raised the shotgun to block the blow. For a split second, his aim was thrown off. It was all Jed needed. He fired the Colt. The shot was not aimed at Cord, but at the large, ornate oil lamp on the corner of Marcus's desk. The bullet shattered the lamp's glass base. Kerosene exploded across the desk, instantly ignited by the lamp's still burning wick. A wall of fire erupted in the room, separating Jed and Sarah from Cord and the men in the hallway. The room was plunged into chaos. Flames devoured the dry papers on the desk, licking at the heavy curtains. Thick, black smoke began to fill the air. The hired guns in the hallway, momentarily blinded and choked by the smoke, fell back in confusion. "The window," Jed yelled. grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her towards the east side of the room. He smashed the rest of the glass with the butt of his pistol and helped her climb through. As she dropped to the garden outside, he turned back for one last look. Cord was already recovering, his face a mask of rage, stepping through the flames, his shotgun raised. Jed fired his last 2 shots, not at Cord, but at the ceiling above him. The bullets ripped into the ornate plaster, and a heavy crystal chandelier, its supports weakened, crashed down, burying the bounty hunter under a shower of glass and twisted metal. Jed scrambled out the window, his lungs burning, the roar of the fire in his ears. He had the ledgers. He had Sarah. But they were still trapped inside the walls of the estate, with a dozen gunmen between them and freedom, and his brother on his way. The fire was a diversion, but it wouldn't last forever. The sound of the gunshots and the sight of thick, black smoke pouring from his mansion sent Marcus Stone into a cold, murderous rage. He and the rest of his men spurred their horses into a frantic gallop, leaving the confused townspeople behind. He arrived to find his home in flames and his men in disarray. "He's in the garden," one of the guards yelled. "He's got the woman." "Seal the gates," Marcus roared. "I want him trapped. I want him alive." In the garden, Jed and Sarah were playing a desperate game of hide-and-seek. The guards were fanning out, their shots kicking up dirt and shredding the prize-winning roses. Jed, his gun empty, was armed only with his Yumashiv and his wits. He knew they couldn't survive a straight fight. "The stables," he whispered to Sarah, pointing to a long, low building at the far end of the garden. "We need horses." They moved from cover to cover, using the chaos of the fire as a shield. Jed became a ghost once more. He would cause a diversion on one side of the garden, drawing the guards' fire, while he and Sarah slipped away on the other. He took down 2 guards without a sound, one with a choke hold from behind, the other with a single, precise throw of his knife. They reached the stables, the smell of hay and horses a strange comfort in the midst of the chaos. But as they entered, they found Marcus waiting for them. He stood alone in the center aisle, a shotgun held loosely in his hands, a look of pure, triumphant hatred on his face. "Brother," Marcus said, his voice a low, mocking purr. "I knew you'd come here. You always did love the horses more than the money." "It's over, Marcus," Jed said, stepping in front of Sarah, the precious ledgers still clutched under his arm. "The whole territory is going to know what you are." "The territory will know what I tell them," Marcus sneered. "They'll know that the mad dog Jedediah Stone came back, killed my men, kidnapped my wife, and burned my house to the ground before I was forced to put him down. It's a good story. People will believe it." "Sarah won't let you," Jed said. Marcus laughed, a chilling, ugly sound. "Poor, fragile Sarah. She'll be so overcome with grief, she won't be able to speak for weeks. She'll say whatever I tell her to say. She always does." He raised the shotgun. "This is the end of the line, Jedediah. You should have stayed dead." From a stall behind Marcus, a new voice spoke, low and steady. "No, Mr. Stone. This is the end of your line." Eli Vance stepped out of the shadows, a big-bore buffalo rifle held steady in his old, gnarled hands. The old ranch hand had seen the smoke, had heard the guns, and his conscience, burdened by 10 years of cowardice, had finally forced him to act. He had ridden to the mansion, a lone, quiet man who had slipped in during the chaos. Marcus spun around, his face a mask of shocked fury. The momentary distraction was all Jed needed. He charged forward, not at his brother, but at a bale of hay suspended by a rope and pulley system in the rafters above. He slashed the rope with his knife. The bale, weighing several hundred pounds, crashed down, striking Marcus and pinning him to the stable floor, the shotgun flying from his grasp. His leg was trapped, broken. He was helpless. Jed stood over his brother, the ghost of Yuma looking down at the architect of all his pain. He picked up the shotgun and leveled it at Marcus's head. 10 years of rage, of suffering, of loss, all came to a single, explosive point. "Do it," Marcus spat, his eyes blazing with a defiant hate. "Prove you're no better than me." Jed's finger tightened on the trigger. He looked at his brother's face, and for the first time, he saw not a monster, but a pathetic, grasping man, consumed by a jealousy so profound it had destroyed them both. He looked at Sarah, her face filled with a terrified plea. He looked at Eli, a good man who had finally found his courage. Killing his brother now would be an act of rage, not justice. It would be a surrender to the darkness that Yuma had tried to forge in him. He slowly lowered the shotgun. "No," Jed said, his voice quiet. "I'm not you, Marcus. I'm going to give you something you never gave me. A trial. You can tell your stories to a judge." He tossed the ledgers onto the ground beside his trapped brother. "And these will tell the truth." The arrival of the town sheriff and a hastily formed posse, led there by Ellie's son, was almost an anticlimax. They found a scene of shocking clarity: the Lord of the Valley, Marcus Stone, trapped and defeated; the legendary ghost, Jedediah, standing not as a killer, but as a captor; and the evidence of a decade of crimes, the ledgers, lying in the open for all to see. The trial of Marcus Stone was the biggest event in the history of Blackstone. The ledgers were a damnatio memoria, a meticulous record of extortion, blackmail, and murder that turned the town's most respected citizen into its most reviled monster. Man after man, emboldened by Marcus's fall, came forward to testify against him. Sarah, her voice clear and strong for the first time in years, told the court the truth of what had happened to Silas Blackwood, and of the 10 years of fear and intimidation she had endured. Eli Vance gave his own tearful confession. Jedediah Stone was the final witness. He did not speak of his own suffering. He simply told the facts, his voice a low, steady monotone that held the courtroom spellbound. When he was done, a formal pardon was issued for the crime he had never committed. His name was cleared. Marcus Stone was sentenced to hang. The empire he had built on a foundation of lies crumbled to ash. In the days that followed, Jedediah found himself a stranger in his own life. He was a hero, a man wronged and vindicated. The people of Blackstone, many of whom had shunned him 10 years ago, now offered him their hands, their homes, their apologies. But he felt a profound disconnect. The man they were celebrating, the noble rancher, had died in Yuma. He stood with Sarah on the hill overlooking the valley, the charred ruins of the mansion a black scar on the landscape. The land, his land, was his again. "We can rebuild," Sarah said, her voice filled with a hopeful, fragile light. "We can start again. The way it was supposed to be." She looked at him, her eyes filled with the love that had endured a decade of darkness. He looked at her, and he felt the old love, the deep, abiding affection he would always have for her. But he also knew, with a deep, aching certainty, that he could not stay. The ghost of Yuma was still inside him. He had learned to control it, to use it for a just cause, but it was a part of him now. He was too hard, too cold. He had seen too much of the darkness in the world, and in himself. "The boy you loved died 10 years ago, Sarah," he said gently, his voice filled with a sorrow that was not for himself, but for her. "He's not coming back. You deserve a life of peace, a life of sunshine. I would only ever bring the storm." He saw the understanding, and the heartbreak, in her eyes. She knew he was right. They were survivors of a war, but their wounds were too different. Jedediah Stone did not rebuild the Stone Creek Ranch. He signed the deed over to Eli Vance and his family, an act of forgiveness and a payment for a debt of loyalty, however delayed. He sold the rest of the land, piece by piece, back to the small ranchers his brother had squeezed out, using the money from the sale to ensure the valley would once again be a place of small, independent homesteads, not a single, sprawling empire. He kept nothing for himself but his horse, his gun, and the freedom he had paid for with 10 years of his life. His last stop in Blackstone was at the office of the territorial marshal. He handed over the ledgers and gave a full, detailed deposition of Marcus's criminal network, ensuring that his brother's poison would be purged from the territory for good. The marshal, a grizzled veteran, looked him over. "You're a free man, Stone. Your name is clear. What will you do now?" "I don't know," Jed said honestly. "The man I was is gone. The man I became, he doesn't have a place here." He rode out of the valley the next morning, just as the sun was rising. He did not ride towards a new life, a new dream. He rode towards the horizon. He was not running from his past anymore. He was simply accepting his present. His brother's betrayal had cost him everything, but in the ashes of his revenge, he had found something he had not expected. Not happiness, not love, but a different kind of peace. The peace of a man who has faced his demons, settled his debts, and is finally, truly, free to ride his own trail. The ghost of Yuma was at rest. And Jedediah Stone, a man belonging to no one and no place, was finally at peace with the silence.